hashtag not in my name, don't bomb Syria. SNP MPs took to Twitter and other social media swiftly after Wednesday's Commons vote to extend airstrikes to Syria to dissociate themselves from the decision. All 54 nationalist MPs voted against the motion, with the First Minister saying beforehand that giving them a free vote on the issue was unnecessary, as everybody in the party's parliamentary group agreed that the case for airstrikes had not been made. But with the government at Westminster securing a significant majority for action, where does that leave the party now? Does it show a genuine fault line north and south of the border? Well, joining us from London is SNP MP Stephen Gethins, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. There seem to be some suggestions that, Stephen Gethins, that the fact the SNP didn't vote for this meant it was somehow illegitimate in Scotland. Could you just explain what perhaps your party members were trying to say?
Well, look, 57 out of 59 Scottish MPs, because remember that the sole Labour MP voted against this as well. What we're saying is that a great chunk of us voted against bombing action in Syria because it was not the right thing to do.
Right, but I mean, it's a slightly odd argument for you to make, because the reason there are so many SNP MPs, for a start, is because of a first-past-the-post system that you profess to profoundly disagree with.
Well,
to then turn around and say...
We still do. It might benefit us now, but we still disagree with it.
Yeah, yes, but therefore to say that somehow or other this is illegitimate for Westminster to vote on behalf of Scotland on this issue because you have so many MPs, because of a system you yourself have just accepted as illegitimate and that you don't agree with, is a very peculiar argument.
Well, look, the Westminster Parliament, that has responsibility over foreign affairs, and obviously I'm in favour of independence, and I still am in favour of independence, but the Westminster Parliament has voted for military action. I don't think it's the right decision, and as a part of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I've been arguing for several months about this and looking at the facts, but that's the situation that we're in now. Now that we're in this situation, I think we all need to get behind our service personnel who will be involved in that.
Right, but again, I mean, have you any evidence that really opinion is clearly divided on this issue throughout Britain. Is there any evidence that Scotland is particularly different?
I think that I think people have got different views on it. And do you know something, Gordon? One thing I said in the chamber this week, unlike David Cameron, I respect people on both sides, and there are people who voted for airstrikes who did so for very legitimate reasons. I happen to disagree with them. I know that my mailbox is full of people who fundamentally disagree with this as well, based on the facts that we have.
Right, but I mean, the only opinion poll that wasn't one of these internet opinion polls that I've seen, I think, was done by YouGov. And it was pretty 50-50. I think there were 44% of people in Scotland were in favour of airstrikes, 41% against. It was much of a muchness with everywhere else in Britain.
You get different polls, but I've had, you know, I think something like 100 to 1 or 125 to 1 in terms of responses in my mailbox with people who disagree with what we're doing. And the reason they are, and this is something we looked at in the Foreign Affairs Committee, was we looked at the military impact, we looked at the diplomatic initiatives, and we looked at the legality, and we found the case had not been made. Okay. This was a fact-based argument, Gordon.
Well, over the last couple of weeks, the city of Sinjar has been retaken by Kurdish forces from IS. And I think it's widely accepted, included by the Kurdish forces themselves. They couldn't have done that without the support of American air power. Why was it wrong for American air power to be used to help? Just to remind people, Sinjar was one of the main towns that was lived in by the Yazidis, who were facing the prospect of mass execution. Why was it wrong for American air power to be used there?
Well, nobody's saying at the moment that it was wrong. What we said previously on Iraq was there was a need for a long-term strategy. Now, this goes to the heart of...
Sorry, you voted against the use of air power in Iraq.
Wait a minute, Gordon. This goes to the heart of the issue, which is there are no ground troops at the moment. There are no Sunni Arab, and that's what the Prime Minister wants. There are no ground troops to take Raqqa. And that's what we're voting on. That's what we're voting on.
Sorry, you voted a few months ago. You voted against. You voted against using the RAF in Iraq.
No, they said there should be a long-term strategy to this. Now, look...
I'm sorry, you voted against using air power in Iraq.
We voted against because there was no long-term strategy.
So,
Gordon,
why was it wrong for air power to be used to liberate Sinjar from ISIS?
What we're saying is there needed to be a long-term strategy, and you need ground troops. Now, there are no ground troops in Syria, and this went to the heart of the debate we've been having this week.
I'm terribly sorry. I think if I were living in Sinjar and I heard what you've just said, I wouldn't be very impressed. I think I'd might very well be saying, if I were one of the Yazidis, I'm extremely glad the Kurds have taken over Sinjar, and I'm extremely glad American air power helped them to do it.
Because you have Kurdish ground troops. Now, the party
but you voted against using air power there.
Can you let me finish and answer your question, Gordon? The party had previously voted against because there was no exit strategy, and that's a significant problem in Syria as well. You do have, and I'll concede that, you have some ground troops in Iraq. You have no exit strategy, but you have ground troops. You have no ground troops. And the issue that we were debating last week in Parliament was about Syria. There are no ground troops. Now, I sincerely hope, I'll tell you what, this is something you won't hear very often, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that just airstrikes do work in putting an end to Daesh. But I don't think that's going to be the case. And the evidence that we collected on the Foreign Affairs Committee demonstrated that other experts don't think that that is going to be the case either.
Just to be clear on this, so are you against the United States and France bombing in Syria?
I think that without a long-term plan, that's what you need, some kind of long-term plan here. Now, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, we quite deliberately looked at, we quite narrowly looked at the UK, because that's the area we're looking at. But there needs to be a long-term plan. Now, with the United States, France and other countries, if you don't have a long-term plan, I struggle to see what impact that purely airstrikes can make.
Right. So, but you seem to be suggesting it was okay for US air power to help liberate Sinjar, which you voted against British air power being used there.
Because of a lack of an exit strategy. Look, we've got a lot of form on this, Gordon, which is taking military action without any long-term strategy. That was a disaster in Libya. It was certainly a disaster in Iraq, and it didn't work too well in Helmand in Afghanistan either. Having a long-term strategy is critical. Excuse me, you voted for bombing Libya. Well, we voted, and I think that didn't pan out too well because of the long-term effect. We spent and this is something the MOD have got to answer some questions on. We spent £320 million bombing Libya. We spent £25 million on reconstruction. In other words, for every £13 we spent bombing, we spent £1 on reconstruction. And for me, those numbers should have been the other way around. So the long-term planning
why did you vote for bombing Libya?
Was not up to much. At the time, you wanted to get rid of Gaddafi. There certainly could have been a humanitarian situation on the ground. What we probably should have done was interrogated even further. I know it was done at the time, but maybe we should have interrogated further what the long-term plans were, because this is the mistake the Ministry of Defence have made time after time from Iraq onwards, is a failure to have a long-term plan and strategy.
Right, but when you talk about reconstruction in the context of extending the bombing campaign to Syria, sorry, reconstruction of what?
Well, this is at the moment you're bombing. This is why the diplomatic is so important, and this is why the Vienna process is so important. You need ground troops in Syria. You also need some kind of agreement between the Vienna process partners, and that's why the diplomatic initiatives are so important. Also, not just bombing is. Look, everybody wants to see an end to Daesh, but not just bombing is a way to do it. You tackle their finances. You're tackling their spread of poisonous propaganda, and this idea that
hang on a second. When you talk about reconstruction,
what about ground troops? We don't have ground troops. Reconstruction has to come, and you have to have a long-term plan. Now, we are talking, when I say long-term, you're talking about a commitment of 20 or 30 years if you're going to go in.
Right.
At least.
But sorry, you're talking about reconstruction of the Syrian state as if it's Iraq.
Well, we were actually talking about Libya a moment ago, Gordon. But on Syria, the same arguments are applying.
Yes,
you
but
cannot leave a vacuum.
No one is suggesting using military action against Assad and the infrastructure of the Syrian state.
Well, the British government was 2 years ago.
Yes, but they're not suggesting that now. So if you're saying
they've changed their minds now. Yeah, they're bombing.
But if you're saying that the lack of money for reconstruction of something that no one is proposing to bomb is a reason for not attacking ISIS, that seems a very peculiar argument.
No, you need a long-term plan for Syria. The lesson of Libya and the lesson of Iraq is to have a short-term strategy doesn't work. You need a long-term plan and commitment. That has to be the lesson. If we have learned anything from the disaster in Iraq, it has to be that you need to win the peace as well as having won the military conflict. And you need to start planning that from the moment that you enter into that military conflict.
All right, Stephen Gethens, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.